Sometimes it's about finding the damn thing, not buying the damn thing. Hi, my name is Vander Puchert and I'm a creative entrepreneur. And I think most of the world's problems, and sometimes that includes when your wife sends you out to go buy oat milk, is just interesting design challenges in disguise. Now in this video, I want to talk a little bit about card sorting, an old technique from my UX days and how that is relevant to the action of buying oat milk. And then also show you that the principles that is locked into the technique of card sorting can actually be applied anywhere else by showing you an old little tool that I have in my back pocket called the UX Kits website deck. So why oat milk? Now, since I've been in Poland, I've noticed something strange about my behaviors. Every time I go into a convenience store, I fundamentally find it so hard to find things. Now, for example, if I had to go and buy oat milk at a convenience store in South Africa, I would know exactly where to go. Now, since moving to Poland, I really struggle to find these products. Now, is that a bad design from the Polish perspective or from a European perspective? No. The reason I'm not getting too angry about it is that I know that a lot of these shops are laid out specifically according to how Polish people shop and their behaviors. You know, I hear a lot of times things like, you need to do things in at least 3 clicks, or stuff needs to be above the fold, or people don't scroll. And a lot of these kind of statements are closely aligned to some of the QAnon conspiracy theories out there. I don't know what you use this for, but I use this thing most of the time to scroll. Now, rather than trying to dispel all kinds of conspiracy theories, let's rather take a technique and actually go to our specific target audience and ask them, how do they want to find things? Or specifically, how do they categorize and bring things together so that we can create platforms where they can find things more easily. Keep in mind that I do realize that a lot of the platforms and things that we do these days are hyper complex. But this is just to get the principles across of what I'm trying to explain. So here's an example of a very simple navigational taxonomy. I created this company called Fake UX, and I started doing the labeling of the top things that I think should be in this website. Now, one of the big challenges with labeling is that you want to make it in such a way that people kind of equate that certain pieces of content will then be hidden or available behind that label. So you can see where I'm getting to is that you have your kind of top line labels or categories, and then within these categories you have certain pieces of content. So when you lay things out like this, you're specifically laying it out in the way that you are seeing this content, not your potential target audience. And this is where card sorting comes into play. Now keep in mind that you can use this when you're creating something new, or even when you're auditing existing properties. So all this still holds true. Once again, a quick caveat. I'm showing it in a very simple way. But keep in mind, this is really data-driven and that you can scale it in certain ways. There's also a lot of technology out there that actually helps you digitize a lot of things that I'm talking about here. So you can make it as simple or as complex as you want to. The same principles still hold true, however. Then the next step is to go out and find your target audience. Now, perhaps you've built a whole bunch of personas before. If you don't know what personas are, go check out my previous video. And maybe your team has already done a lot of research around who your actual target audience is. Now, how does card sorting work? It's actually super simple. You're going to laugh. You sit down with the individual that you want to do the card sorting with, and then you supply them with a whole bunch of cards with the content labeled on them. And then the challenge is, and you ask them to also explain what their thinking is to that they actually start grouping all these labels together in ways that make sense to them. So I went online quickly and grabbed a bunch of content off an existing website, and I created a bunch of cards that represent some of the content that they have on the specific website. Now, what I'm going to try and do is show you the technique called open card sorting. There's actually two. There's open card sorting and closed card sorting. And you usually start off with using the open card sorting to get a broader idea of how people actually group things and then also label those groups. And it'll make sense in a second. Now, you see that I've created a whole bunch of cards here. You will sit down with your respondent and then ask them to sort these cards. Also encourages the respondent to actually talk to you and explain their thought process, and also ensure that they feel that there is no wrong or right. Just make them feel comfortable and start playing with some of these cards. So for example, they might go and say, okay, cool, this sounds like information about the company. There's team profiles might be about the company. and you will end up at some stage with a whole bunch of groups. Now, the one challenge that you might find with the open card sort, especially if you have a lot of content, is that the respondent ends up creating a whole ton of different groupings. Encourage the respondent also to try and maybe group things together where it makes sense to build more robust categories, but you're going to have to kind of play it by ear. Now, the next step is to actually ask the respondent to quickly label each of the clusters that they've created. And then once the process is finished, you will end up with a whole bunch of categories and then labels for those specific categories. Now, what you want to do is you want to grab something like an Excel spreadsheet, capture these groupings, capture the labels, and then repeat it a few times with other members of the specific target audience. Now, once you start feeling a little bit more comfortable about the labels that are kind of bubbling to the top, what you want to do is what they call a closed card sort. So when you jump over to a closed card sort, you're starting to feel a little bit more confident about the certain labels that have been created for the categories, and you want to test them as well. Now, what you do is that you actually reveal the categories to the respondent when you start with the card sort. And then what you do is you randomize all the cards again, and then ask them to sort the content within the specific groupings that you have been laid out. So now you can ask them to sort things, look at the category label, and then explain why they think these things fit under certain categories. Now, the other thing that I haven't mentioned is that you probably want to use a new set of respondents, not the ones that you've already used. So get some new people in to start testing and seeing if they are actually categorizing and grouping things the way that you think they're going to group them. And then also, of course, observe how things are grouped, capture it again in your spreadsheet or whatever you're using to see how the actual trend plays out over time. So in the end, you can have a very strong idea of how you can actually group the content on your platform. Now, also keep in mind that for the most part, when people go onto your platform, they're only going to see the top categories. That's why it's very important to do a lot of work around the labeling to make sure that when people go into certain spaces, that when they get to the content makes sense according to that label, which means that you'll be able to find your old milk in the right place at the right time. Now, I've spoken about finding bio milk in the shop, but here's also a practical example of how the idea of open and closed card sorting is kind of drawn across into the world of web design. It's a little kit that I got a couple of years ago, actually, I think, from the guys at uxkits.com. It's still available. And then inside you will find 54 cards, representations of different elements that you might find on a website. A homepage card, you have the search bar functionality, you have products, and then maybe a sub-product, logging, and then profile. And then you have content, links. I mean, you can see where this is going. There's all kinds of different elements of a website contained here. Now, I'm already instinctively trying to cluster some of these things together. And now the idea with the UX Kits card deck is that you can actually sit down with one of your target audience members when you're starting to think about building a website, maybe with some specific functionality in mind. You now have a set of cards that represent that website, and you can actually have a conversation and brainstorm with the audience members about how they would lay out the website. And you will follow the same card sorting principles. Get them to design something or lay something out, and then map it out, capture it, and then share it with your design team. Of course, I've used this card deck before, actually just working internally with some of my team to just brainstorm some ideas around a content website that we wanted to build a couple of years ago. So a very practical set of cards that just helps you kind of get the conversation going. And of course, after this, you'll start drawing things on whiteboards, maybe start mocking things up, and then ultimately then go back to your audience and then let them test some kind of prototype. But a nice little card deck of 54 little representations of digital elements that can just kind of oil the conversation when it comes to designing that all-important website that you need for your company or service. So there you have it, the UX Kits card deck, available at uxkits.com, nicely put together. I encourage you to go check out what they're hiding away on their website. Cool, so remember the methods I showed today. Open card sorting to get you going, to see how people cluster things together and then start generating some labels. And then finally, closed card sorting to see how those labels perform with the same target audience that you're building your stuff for. And then at the end, the nice little UX Kits card deck just to show you how that methodology can actually be transplanted into something completely different. Great, I hope you found this useful. If you have some techniques you want to share, please drop them down in the comments. And then I want to thank you for watching this. And then as always, Catch you in the comments.